Hey, hi, it's Stephanie with the patient story, and I'm so excited to introduce Sonia Su today, who's going to be sharing her cancer story with us. Sonia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm, really excited to be able to dive into your story. I know it's pretty fresh for you. First, before we get started, how are you feeling today? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. My energy levels are pretty much back to normal, close to normal. It hasn't been too much of a struggle just to quarantine ourselves inside and go on the occasional walk. So it's not too bad. Yeah.
I love it. You're bright. I love your energy. So let's just get started and dive into what happened. Can you tell
Mhm.
us when you started feeling something was wrong and what that was?
Yeah, so I remember this really clearly because I was actually in my first semester of grad school at Georgetown, and I usually go home to my parents' home in Maryland on the weekends. And I just remember I was home on a Saturday night. I was home alone because I think my parents were out for dinner or something. And then I had ordered dinner, and then for some reason, I had felt some chest pain. And so I thought that, oh, maybe because it was the food, like, I don't know, just I had no idea what it was, but I was just like, okay, this is weird. I should probably get it checked out at some point, or maybe just keep monitoring it. And I think, at that time I was approaching finals, like I was really busy with school and just life in general, and just yeah. So I think I waited a little bit more, like maybe a week or so before I just decided, hey, maybe I'll just check out student health. And I think everyone knows how great or not so great student health can be in terms of diagnosing things and just like checking you out. So, but of course, I didn't think it was anything serious at the time. I just, thought it was weird, chest pain that wasn't going away. And so the student nurse or doctor diagnosed me with costochondritis, which is essentially some kind of soreness with the chest bone or something. Anyway, so I think I got some painkillers or some other random meds that just essentially didn't do anything. And I kind of just kept on ignoring it, just like letting it go until the end of the semester since I had so much going on. So yeah, I think it was closer to actually like Christmas was when I decided to maybe check out patient first, which is or the urgent care near my house, and maybe get some blood tests, maybe get a scan or something. And I think it was at that point where they found that there was a mass in my chest. And of course, at that point, we were still just kind of like, okay, a mass, like this is interesting, but I guess we'll just need to follow up with another doctor. And then we were referred to a surgeon at Georgetown. And at that point, I remember, we had to schedule it for after New Year's because of the holidays, and that I myself was traveling. So essentially, like this chest pain was just still going on, and it actually only just kept growing worse until I came back from vacation. We got back, the appointment's ready, went to see the surgeon. They're like, okay, there's a mass. We probably need to do a biopsy before we take it out. They just thought it was a benign mass that they would take out. And so, but
And
after
sorry,
obviously,
Sonia, when they saw the mass, they just saw it through like an ultrasound, or what did they, CT scan, or like?
yeah, they did an X-ray, and then eventually I think they did like a CT at one point, and then they're just like, okay, it's a mass, but we don't know if it's like malignant cancer. So yeah, it wasn't until after the biopsy that really confirmed everything. And then I just remember like walking out of that surgeon's office because it was almost like, okay, we're done with you. Like we're not gonna like we don't need like you're gonna need to go to an oncologist for this, like kind of
Oh
like
my
almost like that in a way. It was just like all so quick, and we're just like, oh, okay, so like we have to see an oncologist. What? And so yeah, it was
Rushed
just
into this chaos, right? And
yeah,
it's like, okay, we're done because that's not our specialty. But
yeah.
even before then, because like you've described a lot that has happened. I mean, you finally, first of all, the biopsy. What kind of a biopsy was it? Was it, and were you like awake for it?
So I think they call it a core needle biopsy, where I believe I was under, and they just take a small sampling of the tumor or the mass, and then they take it off and then that's really the sample that they use for diagnosing everything and just deciding your treatments. Yeah.
Do you remember how long it took for you to hear what those results were from the biopsy?
It wasn't very long. I think if I go back to the dates and everything, I was probably within a week of each other, of just like figuring everything out. So yeah,
Yeah,
not too long.
not too long. It's not too long, but it also can feel like a while, right? But at
Yeah.
that time, cancer hadn't even crossed your mind, right?
No, no, it was still like, oh, I'm gonna be going back to school. Like or I might have to take a couple weeks off for the surgery because I was told that I would need a surgery.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so then you, did you get the results over the phone or did you go back into the office?
Um, it was with that surgeon actually. I think that was when he told us like, oh, it's not benign. It looks pretty malignant, and we'll just refer you to an oncologist or you something like that. So it wasn't. Yeah, that was about it.
So you're saying the day that he did the biopsy, he could tell something was off and had already told you.
Oh no, so this is separate from. So sorry, this is getting confused. It was like a lot going on, but
Yeah.
the biopsy was just its separate thing, and then but the surgeon had received the results, and we were going in for like our next consult, basically like getting ready to like get the surgery. And but at that time he was just like, sorry, this is not for us. Yeah. And then it was a while before we decided to um, figure out the surgeon, actually, I mean the oncologist, because at that point we were just kind of like still navigating everything. And then I think we had an appointment scheduled for like the following week, but then that weekend, the chest pain was actually getting a lot worse. And to the point where my face started to swell, and I was like really worried about that. And I think I know that were you diagnosed with the same thing?
Yeah, yes. And I had the same, yeah, the SVC, and that was one of the symptoms was the bloated face or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So my face was very bloated and the pain was just getting worse. And I was still actually at my apartment in DC. So my mom was still home, like listening to me like describe these symptoms. And she's like, okay, this is getting really serious. Like, I think I need to like contact the hospital to let them know that we can't wait until next week to see the oncologist. And so she literally faxed like all my medical records to like every local hospital that she could find. And yeah, the fact that like she needs to even fax medical information these days. But anyways, that's how she did it. And Johns Hopkins was the first one to respond. And so that's how I ended up literally getting admitted like I think like the next day, because obviously they knew that this was SVC and it could get serious and deadly really quickly. So they immediately I was admitted immediately. They gave me some steroids to like calm it down a little bit. And then that was when, I remember like the bedside manner where like he comes and like tells you like, yes, this is lymphoma. But at that point I like knew it, but then that was like really when it was confirmed. So, and just like, yeah, you're going to start chemo like next week and this is your plan. So yeah.
Crazy. Like such a whirlwind that you're completely thrown into, and not just you, but all your caregivers. So before this oncologist came in and told you, hey, you have lymphoma, when the surgeon said, oh, sorry, like we don't do this, did he or she say what it was? I mean, so what had he or she said to you? Like, did you know what you were dealing with? You said you knew it was lymphoma, but
Yeah, not exactly, because I think all he saw were the biopsy results, and I think he had an idea that, like, obviously this would be cancer, but he himself wasn't an oncologist and couldn't tell me more. And I think he also wasn't at liberty to say anything more. It was just more like I had to just speak with oncologists at that point. Yeah.
how did you, I guess, like navigate mentally that time frame? Because I don't know about you, but for me, one of the worst parts is like in the beginning when you're just trying to figure out what you're dealing with.
hmm Yeah, so I think it was pretty much the same thing. I just remember it was me and my mom in that surgeon's office. Like we came in thinking like, okay, we're getting surgery, and then we get thrown in for a loop. And so I don't know about your parents, but like I don't think any parents, to be honest, would be like ever imagine this happening. And so my mom is always like the very upbeat, like positive, happy type of person. And so like even with some terrible news such as this, like it's kind of crazy to say this, but like I think she's already pretty resilient due to a lot of other circumstances in our lives. So like both my grandparents, both her parents actually, like were like passed away from cancer. And so this is something that's like really close to our family. And I don't know, and she's also really good at like hiding her emotions. So I've always been amazed to this day, like how well they hid it throughout the journey, not only in the beginning. So yeah, I think at that point we were just so really just processing everything. Like it's, people assume that, once you're given that diagnosis or being told like this is actually malignant and could be cancerous, then, the whole world falls apart. But to be honest, like it takes some time to just even process that information. It's not just like, oh my God, we're gonna like, this is the end of the world. It's just, this is the new life that we're going to deal with, and we're going to deal with it together. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and there's like no path put forward, right? It's like, well, we have to keep figuring out what that next step is. And so at that point, you're told by the oncologist, okay, it's lymphoma. But then did you have to undergo a series of like biopsies and tests to make sure they knew what the subtype was and Hodgkin, non-Hodgkin, subtype, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so this is another thing that was pretty frustrating, was because I wasn't even sure myself where I would be treated, because, I was in school in DC. So we're like, okay, maybe we'll try Georgetown MedStar. But then I'm like, oh, but my parents are closer to Baltimore. So maybe we should go to Baltimore, and then I can like stay with them and they can take care of me. So we actually had consulted both Georgetown MedStar and Johns Hopkins around the same time. Within those like mess of like 1 week or two, we were trying to like get second opinions. We're trying to like think about ourselves, like where should I be treated? But yeah, ultimately we decided on Hopkins, and I think it was the best choice, just because it was most convenient for my parents to come and see me, and yeah, just work out everything. But yeah, sorry, what was the other part of your question?
No, that's perfect. I'm glad you answered that, because figuring out where to go is very tricky. What, after the oncologist told you the general lymphoma diagnosis, what was that next step? Was it the bone marrow biopsy? Was it the lymph node excision, to figure out what you were dealing with? Do you remember the next step?
So I didn't do anything else after really the biopsy, because oh yeah. So the reason I said was talking about the whole hospital thing was because they needed to transfer all the records. So I think I did the biopsy like at Georgetown, and then they needed me to like transfer my own records, but like through them to another hospital, and that was just a whole ordeal. So I think honestly it was really within like, they just scheduled everything when I was admitted for them because of my swollen face, and they just like gave me the meds, and they're like, okay, this is your schedule, you're coming in next week and you're going to start. So I don't think I did much else. I may have done like maybe one more scan at that point, but yeah, it was very fast.
Yeah, as we've said, like it goes by incredibly quickly. It does say you submitted your timeline. So January 25th, you did do the PET CT scan, and that was right before you started the RCHOP
Right.
chemo.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe, I know you've undergone a series of PET CT scans by now. For people who haven't undergone one, can you describe what that's like?
Yeah. So a PET scan pretty much takes like either all morning or all afternoon. Usually it's in the morning, just because you're not supposed to eat for at least a couple hours, but you'll get like, patients get all this information either the day before or the day of, just making sure that they're following the procedures. So yeah, in general, like you just go in on an empty stomach, no fluids either. You have to drink this like this it depends on each hospital actually, because maybe some hospitals is white, some hospitals it's like a lemony flavor, and like they have different flavors. But anyways, it's this like contrast, but also there's a contrast, and then there's also this other thing that you drink that lights up your body basically, and makes it easier for the scans to actually read your body. And so that you just sit there for like an hour or so drinking that, and it usually is in like this room. You're usually in a room by yourself. It's better that your body is warm and not cold for some reason. It's better for the scans to detect, to read it. So yeah, they'll usually give you a blanket so you can stay warm. It really depends, because sometimes they also say you can't use your phone because you can't have like any like brain activity or like, anyway. But it depends, of course. Like if they're not scanning your brain or don't care about that part, then maybe it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's just like you're peacefully waiting in that room drinking this weird fluid, and and then yeah, the scan itself doesn't really take that long. There's first like they call it PET CT because it's actually two different scans, and so you'll do the PET first, and then that's maybe, I don't know, like maybe 10 or so minutes, and then the CT is like 5 minutes. And then so all in all, like you're in and out of there pretty quickly. But yeah, it's pretty much an all day process, just because it's depending on the hospital you go to. Like sometimes you'll also be able to meet with your doctor the same day, like after. So usually mine are like, oh, I'll go in the morning, I'll have lunch with my parents like at the hospital, wait for the results, and then meet the oncologist like after lunch for him to explain the initial results with me. But yeah.
Thanks for walking us through that. I know you've gone through many of them. By the way, with the contrast, we always talk about how they warn you, right? Like, oh, it's going to feel like you're peeing, but don't
Oh
worry.
yeah. Yeah, almost forgot about that because it's like, yeah, it's just, that's also part of it. That's like CT with contrast. Usually you'll have, I mean, for me, I always got with contrast. So I always had to get the IV in if I didn't already have like a line in. And then, yeah, they'll warn you that it feels like you're peeing, or it's just, yeah, you get a warm feeling down there. And depending on where it is, actually for me, like I would have the IVs on my arm, but for some reason, like, I think maybe I grew like sensitive to it or something, but every time it went in, it would just burn my veins like so much. Like, and I thought that was like not normal. I was just like, oh my God, it's burning. Like I literally would say that. And then after a while, I'm just like, you know what? I guess this is just part of it, because to be honest, like it's not, this is just, and it's like afterwards, it's fine. My veins, I mean, yeah, they're scared of IVs at this point, but, and any needles, but yeah, that's just what I have to deal with every time I get a scan.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily get easier, or did it get easier for you?
Um, It's, I mean, it's just something that I like deal with. I accept that it's not necessarily easy. It's never fun to have to like go to get the scan anyway, because I don't have any port or line in right now. So like even the process of like getting the IV in like sometimes takes a while. And so, yeah, I think the only thing is like, if anything, it got a little worse because my veins are like crying from the contrast every time it goes in. But yeah.
Blasted. No, I know, and you want them to get a little break.
Yeah.
So before we go any further, when the oncologist described to you your treatment regimen, how did he describe what it was and why, he thought it was the best course of treatment of action?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, actually, because when doctors will say different things. And so mine at Hopkins recommended what's called RCHOP. And he said that would be outpatient once every 3 weeks. And so mine was usually like every Friday. I just go in for basically not a couple hours. It's like all day. The first one usually is a little slower because they don't want to like give it to you all at once. But um, essentially it was for 6 cycles. And so I started like late January and then ended around early May. And so that was just like half a year of RCHOP. And there's another one that they recommended that I think you got. It was our Epoch or our Epic, I don't know how to say it, but that was another option, but it would have, I think, involved, and you know better than I do, but I think it would have involved like 3 consecutive days or something like that each cycle. I don't know, but we did bring that up with the Hopkins oncologist, but he just said there's really like a slight difference, to be honest, in success rate, and it's like this is just what we do. Like, and to be honest, like it kind of makes sense because it's Hopkins. So like in a way, if you go to a big hospital like that, like they just have their ways of doing things, and if you just bring up any other like treatment, they'll just be like, I mean, we could, but like no. And then so part of that second opinion thing during that 1 or 2 weeks, we went to Georgetown MedStar, and then the oncologist there was like, yeah, we can do our epoch if you want. Like that one was completely like, oh, this decision is totally up to you. Like whatever you want, like if you want to do this, we'll do this. If you want to do that, like whatever. So yeah, it really depends.
No, I mean, and you bring up a lot of really good points. So first, just about our epoch, I did undergo it, and mine at least was like 5.5 to 6 consecutive days for each cycle. But I really, and I went to UCSF, which is another large institution. But you bring up this thing about like maybe styles, right? Like certain treatment centers and or individual oncologists will have their own style. And for, I think the cancers, obviously, where you just have to get started, there is less time maybe for the second opinion thing, but second opinions are also just about figuring out what care you prefer, right? So it sounds like for you, you had You had chosen Johns Hopkins because of the proximity, and obviously it's a big place. It's got a good reputation. Was there anything else though? I mean, with the difference in the oncologist's response to even treatment that made you think, okay, I'd rather go to that person? Or
I think at that time, there was really no time to even consider like, oh, do I like this person more or the other? Like, it was really just, okay, what's more convenient? Because at that point it would have been either a 30-minute drive or over an hour, depending on traffic. And when it comes to like getting chemo and having my parents take off of work to like drive me to and from treatments and things like that, like there was really no time to even consider. And at that time, like we were still thinking like, okay, Hopkins is great. Like, and it's true, like Hopkins is really good at what they do, and might as well just do that. And didn't really make much more sense to go to Georgetown, so we just stuck with that. Yeah.
okay, gotcha. I hear you. So before I ask you to describe the RCHOP regimen, were you presented with the option of port, PICC line, different options, or?
So at that time, no. I literally just got an IV like each time I went. And I think it made sense just because I only had to go in once every 3 weeks. And it was only for one afternoon or one day. So yeah. And at the time, my veins were amazing, I guess, like for a young person that had no experience, prior experience to this. So yeah, it wasn't until I relapsed like a couple months later when I started our ice. That was when, each time I had to go in for 3 days. Sorry, I think that's why I got confused. So our ice is 3 days each time every 3 weeks or so. And so, yeah, I think that was when I got the Hickman line, which is essentially like the central line it's like 2 or 3 tubes depending, that like literally pops out of your chest. It's like long tube too. Like it's not even just like the pick or anything that's like hidden. It's like literally popping out. So like I had chosen, actually they had wanted to insert a pick, and then they tried some other things, but for some reason like my veins just weren't having it, and they just couldn't get in it. And so I think the Hickman was really just like the last effort, like, oh, this will work, like we'll just do this. It's not the most attractive or convenient because you can't wear anything lower than like here maybe, unless you want people to see. And yeah, there's a whole regimen, you have to clean it. It's just, yeah, a lot.
A lot of process associated with it. So for this time around with RCHOP, you didn't have to get anything. By the way, just to clarify, so you didn't get a bone marrow biopsy done?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did they explain why?
No, I didn't even like know that was part of it. I think they just went with the biopsy and the PET scan, and then they were good with going with everything. Yeah.
Gotcha. And at this point, how old were you when you were diagnosed?
24.
24. Yeah. So super young. Had they talked to you about fertility preservation, or was that like not even a thing?
That's a good question, because no. When I first started, again, this was literally all happening within like a week or two. So there was no discussion at all. And I hadn't even thought about that, to be honest. I was just like, okay, let's do this. We'll be over with it in like a couple months. Very naive of me. But yeah, no discussion at all. Never even thought about it. I didn't even know that it would, I mean, maybe they mentioned it briefly, but there was no discussion about, oh, you should get this done. And so it wasn't until, again, like after I relapsed, where they're like, okay, we're going to put you on our ice, and this is going to be because you're going to be on track for a stem cell transplant. And but at this point, like, has anyone ever talked to you about fertility? And I'm like, no, actually. And so they're like, okay, well, we can refer you to someone. And so I eventually did speak with someone literally over a year later, when I was, in the process of like preparing for the transplant. And yeah, I consulted with someone, but in the end, I decided not to go through with it, just because at that point I was just really exhausted with all the medical treatments, and just listening to the fact that I would have to like stab myself in the belly like every day for a while. I'm just like, I'm just tired. Can I not? Like, and this wasn't something that is decided immediately. It was obviously because at that time I was like with my boyfriend, who was long distance, and we did discuss this, like, when we went through the options. And even with this, there was like a small chance that it would even be successful. At least that's what I was told. And so I'm just like, well, if there's a small chance and I would have to like um pay fees every year to, keep it, to maintain it in storage. And then also I don't know if insurance would cover it, because at that time, like, it was literally at that year when I think Maryland passed the law where insurance had to cover cancer patients' fertility treatments. But for some reason, my insurance rejected my appeal. I don't know why. And so I think everything compounded together, like, oh, the insurance rejection, the fact that there's like a small chance of it working, that fact that I would have to continue paying, and I don't even know if I want kids. And so all of that, I just said, okay, I'm just not going to go with it. So
No,
yeah.
I'm so glad that you walked us through all that, because the thing is, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, why wouldn't you just do it if you have the time? But you pointed out many reasons why it's difficult, and you've been through so much already, right? Like, you only have so much bandwidth. So I think the point here is that it's a very personal decision.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no right or wrong here. I think the fact that people bring it up is a good thing, so that
Yeah.
optionality is on the table. But I'm so glad that you like made that decision to preserve yourself, right? Because you first. It has to be you first.
Yeah. And I mean, it'd be great to know if I'm like still able to have children, but I mean, I'm still having my periods. They're pretty normal. Like, I think it should be all okay, but yeah, we'll
All
see.
signs point to go. Um, so okay, so let's rewind a little bit. So you did go through RCHOP first. Can you just describe that regimen? I know you said it was once every 3 weeks. It would take like a few hours. Like, what were those infusions like? And then maybe walk us into the side effects and when you started feeling them.
Yeah, so they usually happened, they usually started in the mornings just because they know it'll be a really long day. And the first one was literally all day just because they do try to ease you into it. And even in the beginning, like, it's not like you go in and they immediately give you chemo. It's like they go in, they give you fluids, they give you some Benadryl to make you sleepy, and like, I don't know. And then, um, yeah, they just do a lot. And then maybe it's like literally 2 hours later after you arrive where they actually start everything. And then when they do, it's pretty uneventful, to be honest. It's pretty much like any transfusion or blood draw. Like, they'll just, except for the part where, depending on what you're getting, like, they'll be wearing some extreme outfits. Like, they'll be wearing some protective gear to protect themselves. And you're thinking like, wait, you're wearing all this for something that's literally going inside my veins.
Definitely. By the way, I remember like when they walked in and they're like all suited up like a hazmat suit,
Yeah.
and just to carry the bag, just
Yeah.
and you're like, what about me? Like, you're actually
Yeah.
putting the stuff into me.
I'm like, this is going to my body, and you're like scared about that. I mean, it makes sense because they are exposed to this literally like constantly. So it's maybe that's the concern there. But at the same time, I'm just like, oh man. But every time they did that. But otherwise, it's like, yeah, it's pretty uneventful. I mean, I brought my laptop every time. I brought some books, but then I just decided I didn't have the bandwidth to even like read. So I watched a lot of Netflix. My parents, they're amazing. They went with me to every single appointment, and they just sat there, on their phones, chilling, talking to each other, like, keeping me company. Like, they would bring bags of food every time, like snacks and things like that. Yeah, because obviously it's literally an all-day affair. Like, they'll have to get lunch down at the cafeteria, and like, my parents are like immigrants from China who, like, I mean, yeah, they've been here for a while, but like, at the same time, it's like, American food is just like, they'll have it if they need to. So like, yeah, I kind of felt bad, but at the same time, it's like, that's all we had, and like, that's all the hospital had. So we'll just like get like Subway or like some kind of like other random cafeteria food. Like that's not good or healthy at all, which is ironic. But yeah, so like, we're just like all chilling there. Like, I would be, of course, like the youngest person there always. And yeah, like, it depends on the center, but for me, like, I was in this area where, there are a lot of other patients. It's not like you get your own room, but you'll get your own little nook. And sometimes it's like a little bed near the window, or like your bed, an actual bed, or even just like a reclining chair in front of a TV. So for me, I had a choice. Like sometimes they'll ask you like, oh, do you want the bed or do you want the chair or whatever? Sometimes it's really busy with all these other people there getting treatments. And so you don't have a choice. But yeah, it's pretty much just chilling at your own little nook for like all day.
And you had your parents who kept you company, either with you or they were in the waiting room kind of hanging out?
So yeah, they were actually with me because this was pre-COVID and pre like visitor restrictions. So which I'm really grateful for because I can't imagine like going through all that by myself. Like I would feel so lonely. And so I think this is something that, you know, is so important to have that support with you, like if it's possible. But yeah, just anyone to be there to support you, even if you're like not talking for hours, you're just like sitting there like, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a good idea. Also, in case you don't feel well, maybe someone to drive you to and from the
Oh
appointments,
yes,
right?
definitely.
So then you would get out of there after maybe a few hours or so and go home because you were outpatient, so you'd go to the clinic.
Mhm.
At what point did you start feeling side effects, and what were they? And if anything really helped you with them, you maybe drop some tips for people who are watching and reading this.
Right. So I think like that day I didn't feel much of anything. I think maybe I was just very thirsty, but then definitely starting the next day I was feeling just weird. Like I wasn't sure like how to describe it, but it just felt, I guess it was nausea because at that point I didn't know what it was. I was just like, oh, this is weird. Like I don't know what this is, but I just remember very vividly actually what happened because I was actually still going to classes. Like I was still part of this like club on campus, like this magazine thing where so I wasn't going to classes. I think I was still editing for the campus like publication, and we had a meeting like that Saturday, literally the day after I got my first chemo. And so I still had my hair. I was still like I was like, you know what, I'm good, I can go to this meeting. Like I was so ambitious. Yeah, don't. After you get your chemo, just like try to stay home as much as possible, get some fluids, get some rest. But I was seriously so ambitious. I was still thinking like I can do this, I'm just gonna go to this meeting and like yeah, I'm still gonna be editing that semester. And I ended up continuing working for them. But anyway, so I just remember like I was feeling sweaty. I was feeling like weird during that whole meeting. And then like right after that meeting, I went back into the car. My parents drove me, of course, they're amazing. But like, cause at this point I like moved out of my apartment. I like was back at my parents' house. And so they drove me and they're like, how do you feel? And as soon as I got in the car, I was just like, not good. Drove home, immediately just like rested for the whole day because I just felt so nauseated. And I realized, okay, I can't do this. Like I can't like go to school like after chemo. I can't, yeah, I'm glad I'm taking medical leave of absence for the whole semester, and just taking things really slowly. And then so the next few days were, yeah, just like try to get the rest. And then I think my hair started falling out a couple days before my second treatment, so within like 2 weeks or so. And that was interesting just because it was kind of it started off slow. Like I think, you know, maybe when I would run my fingers through my hair, like some things would come out, but then it accelerated super quickly. So at one point, like I would just, maybe after I washed my hair, like I would see the shower like full of hair, and then I would look at my hair in the mirror and see literally bald patches. And I'm like, oh God. Like, yeah, that was really bad. And then so I just decided like I don't want to see this anymore. Like I don't want to keep like looking at my hair falling out. So my mom just helped me shave. So she's amazing. And
It
oh,
says,
after the first, I had a couple times, I'm sorry. Like my mom shaved for the second and third times I had to shave, but the first time I actually had to go to a hair salon nearby because like my mom was a little worried. She hadn't like dealt with this before. And we went to a hair salon saying like we need a shave. Like and they're like, oh, okay. And then I think my mom casually mentioned like, yeah, I have cancer. Which was like really awkward to hear, I mean to tell people, but they're like, oh my God, like yeah, of course. And then so they ended up not charging us, which is so kind of them, but they did charge my mom because she was like, oh, I'm just gonna get a haircut as well, like just a brief trim. And then of course we were like more than willing to pay like more for this. But yeah, so I got my hair shaved like in public in a salon. And I just wore a hat at that time because it was still like winter-ish, so it was okay to like where it happened.
Yeah. It says on your timeline, yeah, you started losing your hair, or at least noticing larger clumps, maybe February 10th, and then you actually like shaved it just a couple days later. What was the catalyst was just seeing the large chunks, right? It was just like, I can't. How did you feel while you were getting it shaved and after when you realized it was all gone?
So I think like for most girls, like hair is something that like they kind of define their beauty by their hair in a way. Like, and if they don't have hair anymore or if they're bald, they just don't feel pretty. And that's definitely how I felt. But I don't think I really knew like how influential like that would be until it after it all happened. So as it was happening, I was just like, okay, the stranger's shaving my head. Like I'm not gonna get that emotional. Like I'm okay. Like I'll be fine. And even after that, like I put my hat back on, I bundled up with my scarf, like you couldn't really tell, and I'm like, okay, I'm good. Like it was okay. But then of course, like after that, like every time I just like look at my hair, it was kind of like almost amusing. Like my parents would just be like, "Oh my God, you're bald. Your head is like I've never seen the shape of your head, like like of your full head." And they'll like want to touch it and they'll be like, "Wow, this is so cool. You have a great head or something." Like like you would just get like random compliments like when you're bald. So yeah, I think like just everyone like it kind of pushing you, encouraging you, and just like okay, it's okay. But of course, once it starts growing out, like even now, like it's still pretty short, but like
I
you
love
just
it, by the way. I love that link on you.
thank you. It just still doesn't feel the same though. So like yeah, it's of course different for everyone. Like maybe it'll be more emotional for others. Maybe some people are like, you know what, I've always wanted to shave, or I wanted to try this. But for me, it was just like, I mean, I'll try. I mean, I have to. I have no choice. I'm not gonna like, I can't do anything else. So
Right,
yeah,
right. So you get through that. And by the way, for people, I mean, I know this story continues, and you had to shave your head twice more.
yeah,
Through the treatment of RCHOP, you got like a midway scan done and then a post-treatment scan done,
yeah.
and they showed improvements, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, can you describe the last PET CT scan after the RCHOP, and sort of when it was all done, the oncologist, what was his message to you? Like, okay, we're good here.
Yeah. So the thing is, I actually at Hopkins, because so many because it's such a huge hospital, they have a lot of like fellows and just like students technically, I guess, like just so and because I guess they have so many patients, my primary oncologist actually just took a back seat like throughout my treatments, and then I was actually really working with a fellow. And so the fellow told me that, the last scan was basically okay. Like it was never really clear, to be honest. They're just saying like, okay, it looks pretty good. There's like slight activity that likely is scar tissue. So they just dismissed it as scar tissue, and I just kind of accepted that. And I took that as an okay to essentially go abroad after that, because again, ambitious me, like I just didn't want cancer to stop my life or anything. So I had received a fellowship to literally study abroad around like in Taiwan, and I just said, hey, like, can I do this? Like, because obviously with any like study abroad opportunity, they'll need like a certificate of good health or something. So I was like, is it okay to go? And he had basically told me, I wouldn't really recommend it. But you just went through all this, and you still have to do checkups, but technically like if as long as it's not like a third world country where you can't get like blood tests, then it should be okay. And so I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess I'll do it. And at that point I didn't really feel the need to stay, because I don't know, this was just a once in a lifetime opportunity for me, and I just really wanted to take it. And so I just decided to go, and to this day I don't regret it, just because things happen for a reason.
Right, right.
And but the thing is, I had left around June, and I just finished treatment in like early May. I left in June, arrived, and within literally like a day, I started coughing, and that wasn't my initial symptom. Like, I had no coughing before all this started. It was really just the chest pain, and so this was like a new thing, and I just chalked it up to pollution in Taiwan, or like a new environment, or like anything. I even got referred. I even saw like a cancer center in Taiwan just to make sure, like double check, like everything is good, and everything was good. But the cough was consistent. Like it was a dry cough. Like so, that made it things seem really like it was okay, like it's just something. So that cough literally lasted from June through my relapse in October. That was confirmed. So it only got worse. The cough, like I was just seriously just I I couldn't even get a word out without coughing something. And it was really awkward too, because I was like doing an internship. I was like starting this like Chinese classes, like people, and I was wearing a hat too because I was still like pretty bald. And so I feel like I was like the odd one out. And to be honest, I think cancer really affected my outlook in terms of like trying to make friends and like trying to make connections. Just because I didn't want to like just be like, hey, I'm Sonia, like I'm on this fellowship, but I also just had cancer. So and I don't know, maybe eventually some people did figure it out, because to be honest, I was very public with like, sharing it on my blog, and like if they added me on Facebook or anything, they probably would have found out some way or another. But at the same time, like I still didn't tell anyone, like except for my like boss on my internship. But yeah, like it really prevented me from like really getting social. I didn't really I tried to like hide everything, even though I had this weird cough and I was like bald. And so yeah, like closer to October was when I realized this was actually getting really serious. The swelling came back, and I was getting serious headaches. I was in communication with a different fellow this time from Hopkins, and she's like, just keep track of it. It should be okay. But then I just decided to book a flight back home at some point, and just to get everything checked. And that was like one of the scariest moments of my life, because I just remember when I was at that airport, I had just come home. I was at the Baltimore Washington International Airport. I was walking through, actually it was already like when I was in the Taiwan airport, I was already like starting to get winded. But when I was home, it was really bad. Like I was carrying my luggage, I was carrying like everything, and I just like I couldn't even walk without taking a break, because I couldn't breathe. Like it felt like hard to breathe. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like, this is really bad. And in the meantime, I'm like emailing my oncologist, literally like, hey, like I just arrived, like what do I do? Should I go to the emergency room? Like and she was like, yeah, you should go now. Like based on the symptoms that you're describing, it sounds like you've relapsed. Like literally through a freaking like email on my phone. Like when I just landed, I'm like emailing my this fellow, and just like describing all these symptoms. I'm like, I can barely breathe, and they're like, yeah, you relapsed. Like so yeah, that was what happened.
Oh my gosh. I'm like trying to digest what you went through.
Yeah.
Like almost 2 years ago. That is crazy. So you're in the airport. You literally just came back from halfway across the world, and you have everything with you. So do you actually go to do you go home first? You tell your parents like what's going on in your head for next steps?
Yeah, so my parents picked me up. We went home. We pretty much like I ate dinner. Like it was around nighttime. We were just like preparing, because we did think about, okay, let's go to the emergency room just to get checked out, at least to get some blood tests and then a CT scan. Because obviously with a PET scan, it requires some more like insurance approvals and everything. So the least they could do was a CT scan. And that was a nightmare in itself. Like in addition to the nightmare of relapsing, there was a nightmare of going to the emergency room, because I had been dehydrated, I guess. I hadn't drank enough water because I just, was around the world. And so they couldn't find my veins. So they literally had like 3 different nurses poke me 8 times at least. And this was like 11 p.m. at night at this point, and they like couldn't even get a freaking needle in my arm. So like I think they managed to get some blood, but they couldn't get the IV in for the CT scan. And so we spent hours there for essentially some blood draws. So it was the next day where I could actually go back to Hopkins, and then I was admitted like immediately. Everything else from that was a blur, basically, because they immediately gave me chemo. Like it wasn't even a question. It was just more like, okay, describe your symptoms, like everything, and then okay, we're starting chemo like tomorrow. Like you're staying overnight. We're gonna monitor you, and you're starting.
Wow. So it was all through the blood draws and then you describing your symptoms where they said, okay, that's all we need to know. We know that you've relapsed.
Well, blood draws, because they also saw like a certain indication, like a level was like extremely high, and it's like LDH. That's like an indication that like your body's like fighting off something. And then they were able to do the CT scan at the hospital, thankfully. So that while I wasn't able to do it at my local general hospital, they were able to do it like as I was admitted, and before they started everything. But yeah.
And so, by the way, I had forgotten to ask you to say in the beginning, I mean, you had been diagnosed originally with non-Hodgkin lymphoma, primary mediastinal.
Hmm.
Okay, and then in stage 2, was that right? At the time?
They weren't really cleared, and I don't think at that point it mattered because I just remember them telling me like, no matter if it's stage 1 or 2, like you're getting the same treatment. But and personally, I never really like looked too much into it as long as it wasn't like stage 3. But yeah, but I think it was stage 2. Yeah.
And then this time around, and then so they said it's the same cancer, it's a relapse of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then your fellow, I guess, really is the person who then said you're doing our ice, right? Did she explain anything ahead of time in terms of like what that would look like, how it'd be different?
Yeah, so this was a little different in that so I was assigned to like another team this time. So like that's the thing. Like I was just like bouncing back and forth. I don't even know what team I was on at that point. I just like saw a new oncologist, saw a new doctor, saw new fellows like every time, to be honest. Like I was assigned to this group. I just remember like lying in the hospital bed and a team of people would come. All of them would be fellows and then there'd be one like maybe the main I don't know what they call it, the main oncologist.
Attending or
Sorry, what is it?
attending?
Sorry?
Attending?
Attending, yes. There would be the attending, yeah. All these terms. I don't even know all the terms. But anyway, so there was the attending and then all these other fellows. Every time they would come see me, because I was like still in the hospital at the point, like the whole team would come. They would eat, like maybe one of the fellows would like with me directly. But yeah, before everything started, they did tell me like this would be all in preparation for a stem cell transplant. Like I'm not gonna just like get these 4 cycles and then be done with it. Like I'm gonna get these 4 cycles, then move on with the transplant. And I was still a little confused at that point, to be honest. Like I didn't really know why I couldn't just get this and then be over with. But they I obviously like through all these treatments, like your red blood cells are going to be diminished, like basically down to nothing, and it'll be really hard for your system to just make more blood cells, and so that's why I guess like the whole stem cell transplant. But I so yeah, I think at that point, like I was like on track for that. They said 4 cycles, but after 2, I was back in remission, which was a good sign. But for some reason, they still wanted to continue because that's the part of their process. Like even though you're in remission after 2, you have to do 2 more, which was not fun. But at
What
that time,
what was
yeah,
the cycle actually? So like, because I'm not as familiar with RI, so it,
yeah, our ice is like 3 days outpatient, another like a couple hours each day. But yeah, they'll give you, I don't remember exactly like how they distributed it, but they'll just distribute it over 3 days. And yeah, again, every 3 weeks and 4 cycles. Yeah. So I remember I tried to debate with them. I'm like, can we only do 3? I'm like, can we just do 2? Like, I don't know, 3, like, okay, maybe 4. But anyways, while I was doing all this, I went to NIH actually because so that's another thing. Like I feel really lucky to be even in this area where there's Johns Hopkins, NIH, like amazing hospitals. And I went there with my scans and everything, just told them my whole journey. And because I wanted like another opinion, just because I'm like, is this okay? Like, should I be considering CAR T? Because I had heard about that. And they basically looked at my scans and said, well, technically you're clean. I think what they're doing at Hopkins, where, you're on track for transplant, that makes sense. If it goes south or something changes, you can come back to us. And at that point also, like if I even would have qualified for CAR T or anything else, that the CAR T I would have received and then ended up receiving, that was already approved for about a year at that point, or at least a year. So while it was still pretty new, it was no longer a clinical trial, and so I didn't need to go to NIH. I could have gotten it done at another hospital. So yeah, that was the process.
I see. And for our ice, were there a lot of side effects for that one too, or?
It was pretty similar, like nothing markedly different. It was really like the same process where like I lost my hair again within like 2 weeks or so, had nausea. I know some people have, mouth sores, but I actually didn't get mouth sores, at least going back to our chart. I didn't have it until the 6th cycle, after the 6th cycle. And then for our ice, I don't think that was an issue for me either. It was really just the nausea and fatigue. Yeah.
And for you, like, was it just keeping hydrated and moving around that helped you? Were there any other sort of like meds that helped?
So actually with our ice, I was extremely constipated. And I did bring that up with my nurses, and they just said literally over the counter medicine to treat that would work, like Miralax, I think. But otherwise, like I didn't really have major issues where I had to, get other treatments or meds or anything. But yeah, I think in general, just definitely stay hydrated. I think I and that's sometimes not a problem because sometimes, to be honest, your body's just asking for water. It's like begging for water. Like your treatments are just like, oh my god, like your body just feels weird. And also, like, they tell you to just try to drink more. Also, just like flush everything out because you don't want all that just like staying in there at the same time. Like it's weird. But yeah, yeah, I think just to also try to eat. I know that my appetite was not great, and I I think the worst was when I had the conditioning chemo right before CAR T. That was when I had literally zero appetite. I was just bedridden. Like I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't drink. I couldn't eat anything. But I think my tip there would just be find like one or two things literally that you can stomach. For me, it's really weird to say, but for me, it was like this fruit juice thing that I got from my local like organic restaurant that they made these like really amazing smoothies, and then also cornbread. Those are literally the two things that I could eat.
They sound
And
great.
what?
They sound great. Like I would eat them now. Yeah. Cornbread.
Yeah, like I for some reason like couldn't eat anything else. Like you couldn't even ask me to eat an egg. Like I tried, but yeah, that was it.
There are a lot of, I mean, you brought up a couple really great points. I do want to sort of emphasize one being, so constipation, by the way, it is no joke for a
Yeah.
lot of these chemos, right? I mean, it is really hard on your body, and a lot of side effects. Then you take a medication and it causes another side effect. And so it can sort of compound. For me personally, I tried like a bunch of things and then it was like milk of magnesium or something. So I think the point is to just try. Like if something's not working, try something else or ask, because sometimes the medical team might have forgotten to suggest something. Or
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to ask you about is gosh, like losing hair the first time, I think is tough. Usually for people, if they don't relapse or whatever and it's first line and then in remission, it's just the one time, which can be difficult. What is it like, right? Like having to, and not to mention you had to again the third time, but even just the second time, do you remember, was it harder? Was it like, okay, well, I've been through this before?
Yeah, it was more the latter. It was more like I've been through this before. My hair hasn't even grown out that much, to be honest. At that point, like it was like a boyish style. I'm like, I'd be fine with cutting this. Like, and my mom was always like, my mom always says that she's like she could cut hair for a living. Like she can, like she cut our hair as children. But I'm like, okay, mom, that's like our children's haircut doesn't count. So like she was really on board with like shaving. She was like, I'm gonna help you this time. Like I can do this. And so, yeah, like it was pretty easy. Like I didn't have to like go to a salon and ask them like, hey, can you shave my head because I have cancer? Like it was much different the second time around. So yeah, it was much easier just because I knew what to expect. And I think, I already didn't really like my hair. So like it wasn't a problem. Yeah.
And you helped your mom live out her hairstylist dreams, right? Like
Exactly. And I'm like, yeah, go ahead, mom. This is your time to shine.
for you. Yeah, I love that. You guys seem to have a really nice relationship, so I'm
Yeah.
glad you guys had each other then. Okay, so you've been through these 4 cycles of RICE. I know you undergo scans. Can you sum up where you are at the end of the 4 cycles and what the next step after that was?
Yeah. So at the end of the 4 cycles, I had to start all the tests that they needed to do for the transplant. So at that point, before you do the transplant, they have to make sure like everything else is okay with you. Just because if anything goes wrong with the transplant, they need to know that it wasn't because it was a pre-existing like condition or like some other issue that you had before. They had to know it's because of this. And so I literally just remember going in for like a lot. Like they schedule you for almost it's as if it's your full-time job where you have to go in like constantly for like a million tests. So I think the busiest day was January 31st. That was when I went in for literally like, I think maybe 30 tubes of blood that was drawn from me. Like it was a whole table full of blood. So they had to test out literally everything. And they, you know, I had like a lumbar puncture to test if the cancer spread to there. I had to test like my lungs. I had to get a scan for my brain. I had to test like everything. So it was really exhausting just to be there all day and have my parents like be there as well. I'm sure it was really hard for them just to like sit there and wait for me to like do all this stuff. I also had gotten like a PET scan, just like one last one before like, yeah, at that point I found a match, by the way. Like, so after RIs, like I had to, you know, go through the whole like B match thing. I know that you had like done something similar, but yeah, I had to like, you know, get all my friends like, hey, like, can you please like join this registry, because like I'm Asian also, so like it's really hard to like for me to find a match. And luckily I ended up finding like 2 matches, but then I think one either like dropped out or something and didn't work out, and then the one did confirm. But then so at that point I'm like, okay, great, I have a match, like this is going to be great. And I went through literally orientation, like you sit in the room where they have a slideshow, like this is like going step by step, this is what you to expect, like as if it was like my first time with cancer, you know, like, but they really just want to make sure that you know exactly what to expect, because a transplant is no joke. Like you're going to have, you could have serious side effects, and short-term and long-term. And so, yeah, like I just remember that day of like being there, experiencing all this. The next day I still had some things going on. I had just finished up the lumbar puncture, and I get a call. I'm supposed to like meet with the doctor like later, right? But then I get a call and the nurses tell me like, hey, actually like you need to meet with the oncologist now. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like this is not good, because I had just had the scan the day before. So it's like, okay, it has to be like the results from the scan or something. Like it has to be something that I just knew it was bad news. Like why else would your oncologist want to see you immediately? Because otherwise, like honestly, when you see your oncologist, you're gonna usually wait for like an hour or two. Like it's never gonna be on time. Like it's always gonna be late. If it's like early or on time, there's something wrong. So, yeah, I ended up seeing him. I was just like exhausted because I'm like, oh, just got all these tests. Like, don't tell me this. Like, don't tell me this bad news now. He told me it came back for a 3rd time, and that the transplant was canceled, because you have to remain in remission to be going to the transplant, at least for me. And so they're like, yeah, there's no transplant. I'm like, oh, so all these tests were useless, because like like literally all these tests, like those were for this very purpose. And so, yeah, I remember just like crying, because I don't think I at that point showed any emotion to the oncologist before that. Like I was just like very calm and collected. But at that point I'm like, oh God, like 3rd time, like it's over. Like, so that was devastating. But so then the plan after that was really just to see another doctor about radiation, because they were planning on, okay, let's do aggressive radiation, more chemo, so that we can try to get you back in remission and then do the transplant. And that plan, to me, I'm just like, are you serious? Like, I just went through all this and you want me to do more radiation? I actually like start radiation. I hadn't done radiation before this. Like irradiation and chemo and transplant. I'm like, oh no. So yeah, at that point, I knew that I had to essentially be my own advocate and try to figure out other options. So I decided to check out University of Maryland down the street and just consult about CAR T being an option, because I had heard about it. I knew that it was an option for as 3rd line, you know, if your previous treatments failed, and it was still relatively new at that point. It had only been FDA approved for a year. It was in clinical trials before that. And so, yeah, after that consultation, and they said essentially that I was okay for CAR T, I was so relieved. Like I immediately was like, okay, we're going with this, because there's no way that I'm going through like what they wanted me to do at Hopkins. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad you advocated for yourself. I mean, it happens at different points for so many patients, right? But you have to listen to the sort of gut feeling of, wait, no, I can't. And it's a fine balance, of course, because the medical team, they're trained and you're deferring to them for so many things. But this was one time where you said, absolutely not. I'm going to figure out another way. So I'm so happy that you did that. And it's a great message for people who are listening to your story. So Sonia, you then switch right to that hospital. Now this is like the third treatment. Walk us through what this process is for CAR T.
Yeah, so CAR T is a totally different animal in a way, because it's not like they're giving you chemo or giving you radiation, like a certain kind of like standard treatment that they have for everyone. But it's more like they take your cells. There's something called apheresis. They collect your T cells and they send it off into a lab in California. But maybe now I think they just recently opened a lab within the hospital. But anyways, at that time they sent it off to California, which is really strange to me. But they like kind of freeze it in a way, and then they'll re-engineer it into mutant T cells, which are told to essentially find your cancer and attack it. So in terms of the actual day of CAR T, it's like any other blood transfusion. You just go there. I mean, you have to be admitted though. That's the difference. Like you're admitted because they expect you to stay for at least 7 to 10 days. And they just give you back your own cells, except they're slightly different. And they're essentially like an army of T cells that are like going into your body and like attacking everything. So yeah, I think the day of CAR T, it was just, I say that it's like actually my best and worst day because it was like before CAR T and similar to a transplant, you have to go through preconditioning chemo. You have to give some room for your blood to come back into you. So they have to essentially deplete your white blood cells, deplete your cells, your blood. And so then, yeah. And then also it's ideal, I think, to have as little cancer load as possible. At least that's what I heard. So actually I ended up getting the radiation that I had was what they call bridging chemo. So where you're literally like in limbo, you're like waiting for your next treatment, but you also can't wait that long. So you have to like get something else in between. So I had like a very, very light dose of radiation in between, like having my T cells collected and waiting for it to come back. Cause that process takes about like 2 or 3 weeks. And so during those couple weeks, I was just like, this cancer is literally growing inside me. Like, I don't want to keep waiting. So that was also another moment where like, I kind of elected to have radiation. I kind of elected like, hey, is there some way do I need to do something right now as I'm waiting? And so, yeah, I ended up getting radiation, very light radiation. And then, yeah, day of, they just
You
give.
describe the radiation part of it actually, because I see that you had radiation three days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, you have to, so as with any new treatment, you have to essentially like do a consult with the doctor and they will, prescribe this treatment for you, depending on what you have. And so for me, they knew that they didn't, so I was actually also thinking about proton radiation. That's where it's even more precise. Like there's a difference, and I for some reason I thought proton would be better because of what I heard. But at the same time, for me, like regular old radiation was good enough. There are certain people who may need proton or may like proton, especially if it's like very close to the chest and it needs to be more precise because they don't want to damage your heart or anything. And of course mine was actually at the chest, but it wasn't like too bad. So there's like radiation is fine. But anyway, each day, so you'll have a couple of appointments, but at first they'll have to like draw some marks on you, just make sure like they know exactly where to target on the days of. I know that like in previous year, like maybe a couple decades ago, they had to literally tattoo the things on you. But for me, like it was literally only a couple days. So they just used like a permanent marker, like some kind of marker to like draw on my chest. And you just have to make sure you don't get it wet. Like they'll give you some like things to try to, they give you like I forget what it's called now, but like a guard. So when you shower or something, you can like protect it. So it did fade a little bit, but anyways, in the end, like they still have their own records and it was still okay. Like it wasn't like completely gone. But yeah, so you just go in to like have them get you ready and prepare you mentally, I guess, and also physically. And then, yeah, when you go on radiation, my team was incredible. They were super nice to you, to me, and I just felt really relaxed and comfortable. And you don't feel anything. It's really just you're on the bed, maybe for a couple minutes, to be honest, and then you're done. So it's very simple.
Good. I'm glad it was at least more straightforward, that procedure. So you did that 3 times. You had the preconditioning chemo, which by the way, how long were those infusions? It was a light, sort of like chemo light or?
Yeah, it was, again, because if you take into consideration the fact that they do need to give you fluids for like an hour or so right before, like it does still take a couple hours. So I think it was like about like, it was like 2 or 3 days of that. And then you get like 2 rest days. And then it was really during those 2 rest days where I felt like so exhausted and drained and I couldn't eat anything. So that was like really like terrible. I was in bed for those 2 days, basically.
You were bedridden for those 2 days before going in to get admitted into the hospital for CAR T.
Yes.
Can you describe, okay, so you had kind of set us up already. Um, Talk to us about the day you go in to get your T cells back and what happened.
Yeah, so I had a really early morning appointment. I just remember waking up. It was still dark outside. It was cold because it was still like, it was March. And my parents drove me, of course, and um, I got my own room. And as soon as I walked in, I just was like, okay, let's get this over with. Like even like when I went to check in, actually, like before I even got to my hospital room, I couldn't even like stand up for more than like a couple seconds. I had to like hold my mom's like hand, arm, and like just walk. Like I just, and the thing is, when you were admitted, they take a photo of you, and so like I had my like hat on, I had my glasses on, like, and they took a photo and I still have that photo and it's like in my records, like, which is great, but like I look dead. And that's exactly how I felt. So I just walked into the room, the sun was finally starting to rise. And like, it was a pretty good room, it was pretty spacious, but I saw a bag on my bed and I was like, oh, what is this? Like, it looks like a goodie bag or something. And I thought it was from the hospital. But actually, when I asked the nurses, they said it was from a former patient. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. So I looked into the bag. I'm like getting ready to like, I'm like dropping off my things. I'm just like looking at the binder that they have there. But this like bag was so special to me because I opened it and there was a note from a former patient, that patient that was in that unit a year prior, and basically said like, hey, we're wishing you the best, like I'm doing well now a year later, like there's a gift card, there's like snacks and like a blanket, like toothpaste, just like all these goodies. It didn't, honestly didn't even matter what was inside at that point. I just like, I thought that note was enough, like more than I needed at all. Like it was just everything to me at that point. And so I kind of like latched onto it and was like, wow, like this is amazing. And I was like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna steal this idea and like do this when I'm out of here. Like it kind of gave me the hope and motivation to like keep going. And so that also kind of gets into like what I'm doing now, but I can talk about that later. But yeah,
Yeah.
that just gave me so much motivation and inspiration. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And I really think that because of that, and the fact that like the CAR T infusion itself was so uneventful, which is a good thing when it comes to cancer. It was extremely uneventful. Like literally, I just sat down on my bed. They give you some like candy like to suck on because there is a weird taste because some kind of preservative to like keep the blood fresh, I guess, which is strange to think about, but there may be some weird taste for some people. So I was like sucking on candy. I'm just like sitting there. My blood's coming back to me. I'm feeling fine. There was actually happened to be like a student who just decided to like join in because CAR T was and still is a very new thing. So they like to have students in whenever possible, just like witness the whole situation. And like poor her, like nothing happened. like literally I'm just sitting there like talking to her, like chatting with her. She was like probably my age, to be honest, or younger. I was like, yeah, like how's school, like blah blah blah. So I'm like, it was a really pleasant conversation. So I think that conversation with the care package, just those combined, just made me feel I had a 180. Like I was a completely different person. So yeah, I think it really depends. But for me, like I felt terrible, miserable, like dead going in. But then the whole process ended up being not as bad as I thought and just totally fine. So yeah.
And after everything you'd gone through, I'm really glad to hear that it was uneventful.
Yeah.
Like you said, in the cancer world, VIP is not good. Uneventful is very good.
Uh,
So, so I see. Okay, so the process overall, when you're actually getting the T cells, that only took how long again? That was a couple hours, or
I think it was even less than an hour. Like it really wasn't that long. And then for the rest of the day, for the rest of the time, really, it's just really like a wait and watch. Like, what will the T cells do to your body? Like, and so they do tell you to expect a fever after a couple of days, and that you may experience some neurological toxicity, meaning that you might not recognize who you are, or you might not recognize what's going on in life, because your T cells are doing its job. Like, it's really attacking not only your cancer cells, but also some other cells in your body. And so for me, like literally the first 4 or 5 days was like nothing happened. Like, I was just like staying in the hospital. Like, I was feeling fine. I was still like, I had some side effects from the chemo that I had received a few days before, but otherwise, like, I was okay. And it was literally on the night of my birthday. I turned 26 at that point. Yeah, I turned 26. It was midnight. I remember waking up and vomiting multiple times and just feeling terrible. So the the day or two before, I did start having a small fever, but it was just manageable still. Like, it was fine. Like, it was okay. This, like, it's starting. Basically, I'm like, okay, I expected this. I knew it. So the fever is just like, okay, it's getting worse. I was like, oh, I mean, yeah, I feel like I have a fever, but it's fine. Like, it's nothing compared to chemo. Like, it's really fine. So it's really when it really got serious was when I started vomiting, and it just kept coming, and I just felt terrible. And they gave me some meds to control it, but the whole experience was just like, wow, it's getting serious. And I also like my memory was starting to like go at that point. So all I remember was that like they told me, okay, you're going to be transferred to the ICU. And they told me again, they had said like, you're most likely going to be in the ICU. Like, the things that they tell you before this to prepare are like terrifying, but at the same time, like, I'm thankful that they tell me, because I know that like if I'm going to the ICU, it's fine. Like, they know this, they know how to treat it. And so it's not like I'm in a clinical trial where it's like this thing is going to be unexpectedly, they're going to try whatever. They have a standard procedure where like, okay, if you have a fever, they'll give you this. If you have neurological toxicity and you have to go to the ICU, like, they're going to give you this. So yeah, I had to stay in there. Ended up being a 2-day stay, and I don't remember most of it just because I did have that extreme reaction where they throughout this, actually, they have to test you. So you have to just write your name and like where you are on a piece of paper like every couple hours. But when you're in the ICU, you have to write it every single hour. And so looking back at my sheet, I remember like my sheet was totally a mess. Like, I couldn't even write beyond like my, and it was like a bunch of scribbles. Like, it was crazy. So yeah, that happens. But of course it depends. Like, some people literally have no symptoms, but some people have to stay in the ICU for a couple days. So yeah, for me, it was kind of like in the middle. Like, it wasn't like a serious reaction, but at the same time, it was serious enough to go into the ICU. But yeah, after I was out and back into my room, I was feeling okay again. Like, I just felt normal. I was literally doing a puzzle that my sister had sent me for the rest of the days. And I was just really anxious to get out.
That's amazing, though. I mean, yes, you had the 2 days in the ICU, but outside of that, you handled it very well, and your body was able to deal with the mutant T cells
Yeah.
doing their thing. So it says you were discharged April 1st or so.
Mm-hmm.
When you were discharged and you went home, like how was that at home? Like, did you have to recover? Were you feeling pretty good?
I was just relieved at that point, because I think, any hospital stay is just like not really welcome. Like, you really don't want to stay at the hospital, like, especially when your parents are there. Like, my parents rotated their shifts to stay with me. Like, they could not leave me alone. Like, so, which was like a good and a bad thing, but like, they would bring my like home cooked meals, which were amazing, because obviously the hospital meals are not great. I would order them, but I would give them to my dad. And then my mom would like cook the actual meals that I would eat, which was really amazing. I honestly would have lost a lot more weight if it weren't for her meals, because I was hardly doing any activity throughout my stay. Like, I would maybe take some walks around the ward, but I was in the same ward as the stem cell transplant people. So it's extremely isolated. You can't even, this was pre-COVID, by the way. So like, you couldn't go in and out without wearing a mask. Like, you had to be very careful. And so just being out of that environment was so relieving, because I didn't like to be checked like every couple hours. Like, I had to be given meds every couple hours. Like, there's a constant beep of the machine. Like, the hospital noises are just not comforting, or not not a good environment for sleeping or getting any rest, to be honest. So yeah, it was just really relieving to be back home.
And then I know you got a scan about 2.5 weeks later. How are you feeling mentally, I guess, leading up to the scan? Because you feel pretty good, but I'm sure mentally there's a lot going on after.
Yeah, so at this point, I just remember the couple weeks after CAR T, I was just really exhausted. I was fatigued. Like, I would just stay on my couch and not really do much. I didn't have any energy, but at the same time, I didn't feel like any worse than that. Like, so I was able to take some walks and get some fresh air, but other than that, like, I still really wasn't able to do much. But mentally, I was just like, I'm glad that I'm alive. Like, whatever happens, happens. I feel good, so I didn't go in expecting doom or anything. And yeah, I just remember like sitting in that room with my parents when right before the scan results came back, and the doctor, he was really busy, but I think his like fellow or something, so many fellows, but his fellow like briefly stopped by and just gave me a thumbs up, or like something, like just saying it's good. I'm like, oh my God. So like we had like a mini freak out before the official like confirmation that it was all good, but we're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. I like literally I remember taking a picture of my parents, because they were just like, oh my God, thumbs up. Like, we're just like, yeah. So then the call just came and we just like officially confirmed, like, yes, it all looks good. And so that was like the biggest relief of my life, like, especially given everything that happened. So yeah, I felt amazing.
I like feel myself cheering up for you, because that was just like a year ago and you had been through so much. And I know a big part of why it gets so tiring and exhausting is just getting bad news constantly, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's never over, and then there's like the next thing, and you were subjected to that over and over again. And so finally, April 17th, you have the scan, and then you're able to go and get the results like a few days later, maybe a couple days later, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, so, and with your parents, so the moment that the oncologist actually gave the official results, um, I know you said you had like a pre-celebration, but were you able to process it at that time, or did it take some more time for you to actually realize, oh, okay, so treatment's over, like for real this time?
I think with, throughout this journey, like every little like good thing or good news is just an accomplishment in itself. Like, I knew that it still wasn't over in a sense, and even still now it's not really over, just because I still have to go back for checkups all the time. Like, I still have to get scans. Like, my upcoming one is literally in a couple months. Like, it's never a sure thing, and that's the part about survivorship. Like, people say like, yeah, it's kind of like you're done with treatments and then you're just supposed to go back to real life, like but the reality is that, like, I mean, for me, I'm always thinking about it still. Like, any little pain, any little like medical concern, literally I'm thinking like, oh God, it's cancer. Like, or I mean, I try not to get too depressed or like think too deeply into it, but that thought really does come up like a lot, especially with my relapses. Like, I think that if I hadn't relapsed, if everything went well the first time around, like, things would look a lot different. Like, I don't think I would, yeah, I'd be grateful, but like not this grateful. Like, I wouldn't be, like, there'd be there's like varying degrees of like gratitude. And at this point, like, I don't even know how much gratitude I can express, but like every day is like a blessing. It's ironic, but it's kind of like a cheesy cliche, but it's really true. Like, I sometimes think like, I can't believe I'm still here. I can't believe I'm still able to like do what I do. Like, yeah, it's just a lot. But I just remember feeling really happy, and I couldn't really think too much beyond that. Like, I'm just like, that's great news. Like, I'm not gonna think about anything else. Yeah.
Learn to celebrate and really celebrate that moment itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and you've mentioned a lot through this, your parents, and in particular your mom. So I think a lot of questions are about support, right? Did you find, I guess number one, let's start with your parents. Like, how did cancer impact the relationship with your parents?
If anything, it definitely drew me closer to them, especially because, you know, they really accompanied me to every single appointment, like not only treatments, but also like the checkups and follow-ups and scans and everything. And yeah, they still have their jobs. Like they had to like, I mean, the thing is they're business owners, so they're able to be more flexible with their schedules and come with me when they need to. Um, and especially with my mom, like she was a primary caregiver, I would say, because she had to essentially help flush my Hickman line every single day. She had to, you know, cook my meals when I wasn't able to. She had to make sure that I was like, you know, staying hydrated, staying fed. Just, you know, it kind of took her back to like taking care of her, like, you know, daughter. You know, even though I'm like, I it wasn't too long ago where she had to be in that role, you know, like in terms of me being a kid in high school or something. I had just graduated and I had just only been working for maybe like a year or two at that point, and so like it was kind of natural for her and natural for any mom, I guess. Like it wasn't an extra like I don't know. Obviously, as I mentioned before, like she and my dad both hid their emotions very well for me. And so of course it was hard on them, but at the same time they were really strong for me, which I really respect and admire. So yeah, it brought us definitely closer together, because with any like health or life event, like this is something that really makes you rethink your values and your priorities in life. Like, oh, maybe that like minor fight with someone, or like maybe this minor like habit that you're annoyed with about your mom, like that's like nothing, you know, compared to like what they've been doing for you, what we've been through together. So
You know, it sounds like super strong relationship that got even stronger. Any advice for people in terms of what are the most important parts of the caregiver like needed during this time? Like obviously cleaning like the Hickman line, maybe driving to and from appointments, taking notes during appointments. Like what were the top ones for you?
yeah, the main one was transportation. I couldn't imagine like driving myself to and from treatments. That was the main thing. And then just being there to take care of me in terms of like being fed. I really couldn't, there are some days where I couldn't take care of myself like at all. Like they just had to, you know, give me my meals or like try to feed me, like if I could have an appetite. Make sure that I'm like just generally okay, like I'm not like in pain or like sometimes, yeah, if I needed anything, honestly, it was just like if I needed anything, they would just be there for me. And I think that's important to just have someone like who you know you can call literally on the phone, or like literally like down the stairs, like, hey, like I need you.
Yes,
um,
well.
yeah,
um,
I had about, but I didn't.
in addition to your parents, were there other people you relied on? I know for a lot of patients in particular, it's like it's hard to ask for support from people, whether it's friends or colleagues or who have you.
Yeah, so I guess my huge mental support was my boyfriend at the time, and now my husband. We were actually long distance, so like because we met in Taiwan, not like Taiwan during my fellowship Taiwan, but like the year before that. But and if it weren't for him, like literally FaceTiming him like every single day, like I don't know how I would have gone through like what I'd gone through. Like, yeah, sure, like I could call my sister, but she was also like technically long distance. She was in LA, and yeah, I had some friends, but like some friends would reach out and they'll be like, yeah, if there's anything I can do, like let me know. But of course, it's like, but what can I really ask you to do? You know, like it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, that's nice of you to say that, and I really do appreciate that. I think, you know, just having people like reach out is like better than complete silence, especially from like friends who you thought you were friends. Like there are some people who will definitely ghost you because they just don't know what to say, and like this is something that's like maybe some people really have never been affected by cancer in any way, which is amazing. And so they just like have no idea what to say. But so for me, it's like, yeah, some people reached out, but to be honest, like I didn't really rely on like any like friends in a way, like as much as like my boyfriend and my parents. Like they were the
family.
main ones that I really could rely on, just for that mental and physical support. So yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, you bring up something that I've heard countless times too, which is the please don't say, let me know what I can do for you.
Yeah.
Please be specific. Like, there are things that people can do. I mean, of course, the spiritual support, the mental support, the well wishes, that's all great. But yeah, it's like, don't give me one more decision that I have to
Yeah.
ask you for. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wrapping this up, I do, and we will talk about your purpose, like your mission right now, after you were inspired in that hospital room with that gift package. But I do want to ask too, just about mental, like, fortitude and strength and bandwidth even, because you have gone through this, like, in several iterations, really. How did you power through? Right? Like, if you had to give guidance to other people, people who relapsed or dealing with it now or whatever, what would that be? What helped you go was it day by day? Was it moment by moment?
Yeah. That's a really good question because it's like always a struggle, even if you have good news. Like, it's cancer is just like something that just enters in your life and kind of never goes away. And so for me, like, I just try to rely on like the smallest things to give me like happiness or hope. So like my sister had just gotten a new dog at that time, and so like I would just ask her to like send me photos and like videos, and like I'm a huge dog person, so like literally that was enough for that moment. And they also surprised me actually. So like I mentioned, they lived in LA. After my first relapse, they surprised me by flying over here with their dog. And so literally I remember I was like waking up in bed, I heard some scratching on the door. I'm like, what? I'm like, oh my God, didn't my parents like buy me a dog? I'm like what? I'm so confused. Like, I need to answer the door. I'm just so I like open the door, and I like heard the dog comes and like flies and like hugs me. I'm just like, oh my God. It was just like the most amazing moment. So like, yeah, if you can have your sister like buy a dog for yeah, I think just like finding the little things that that have always given you comfort, just like seeing that, but also like finding new things as well. Like for me, the new thing that I discovered while like throughout all of this that mentally gave me a lot of energy and required little energy of me was watching YouTube videos, like watching mukbangs, which is like essentially for people who don't know, like people who just eat in front of the camera. Like I never thought I'd be interested in that, but like when you have no appetite and you can't eat yourself, like you kind of want to just watch other people eating, and like that's entertaining, and it requires like zero brain energy. Like I'm just like laying in bed like watching this, I'm just like, yes, this is entertaining and this is enough for me. Like so sometimes just like discovering like things that you never thought would be interesting, like videos, like dogs, I don't know, like Instagram, like anything. And for me, it was also just like having my boyfriend there, like knowing that he's there to like talk to me. I actually like our conversations were not even about cancer, like to be honest. It was like about literally anything else, like his life, like just like things going on like in the news, or like his family, my family, like anything else. So yeah, I would just say try to distract yourself with as much entertaining things as possible. I found that taking walks was also really helpful when you're able to. I just tried to walk with my mom as much as possible. And then when my boyfriend came, or now, we were also trying to like just go for long walks and just take it slow. Like I'm not trying to like, do hiking or anything, but yeah, just try to do little things like step by step, day by day. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And speaking of interests, so I'd love to give you the chance to talk about your organization. Can you talk to us about Kids to Hearts? If you could talk about, I know you talked about the inspiration already, so just tell us what you do.
Yeah. So again, like I basically saw that care package and said that I needed to pay it forward. Like it was something that I thought that it was so kind. And so I of course I had to go back to school though. Like after I found out I was in remission from CAR T, like that fall I returned to school. And so I was focused on school, and then my last semester was this past spring. And I decided to try out some entrepreneurship classes and just try to develop this idea, because I wanted it to be more than just like, oh, like an occasional thing where like if I have the time, like I'll come up with a care package and like give to the hospital or something. I knew that this was a need because obviously throughout my years of experience with the hospital, like I knew there was so much lacking, especially for young adults like myself and just younger people in general. It's like, okay, you're given a binder full of information, and like you're expected to just like read through that or use it or somehow like rely on that for all your information and all your needs. Like, oh, nutrition, that's like, look at page like 75, flip to that tab. And it's like, I got so many of those binders too, because I had met with so many people, had to go back through all that. And it's like, they'll just give you all this information. It's like, okay, this is not helpful, not inspiring, not hopeful. But that care package was. So this last semester, I really decided to like speak with a lot of professors and mentors and try to develop this into what it is now. And now it's a nonprofit, officially registered. And what I'm trying to do is essentially make hospital drop-offs, but also ship kits to whoever needs it. And in doing this research and trying to figure out how I can work on making this sustainable, I did consider options, of like selling these kits, and other companies do sell their kits and or similar care packages. But for me, the idea of selling to cancer patients like just rubbed me the wrong way, especially when we have so much more other things to worry about. Like not everyone can afford even just like a $30 kit. So I knew from the beginning that I needed to make it accessible. And so now I essentially have these kits where, I base it on my own experience, like what I needed. I needed like lotion that like with no fragrance lotion, like because my skin was sensitive, but I also needed like sunscreen because obviously chemo affects your skin in other ways and makes it sensitive to the sun. And so also lip balm, just like basic things, like a reusable water bottle that would make me want to actually drink water and like just keep myself hydrated. And so like just like little things that I knew that were useful for me that I knew I needed to include in this kit. And so yeah, it changes every month, but essentially I'm just right now it's like still a thing where I'm like shipping kits every week. I try to do at least 2 hospital drop-offs every month. And yeah, it's like it's pretty much a full-time thing really. Like I'm like sourcing things, I'm like speaking with suppliers, I'm like speaking with hospitals, I'm like doing a lot just as a one-person operation, similar to I guess Patient Story. But like yeah, it's a lot. But I just knew that this mission to essentially bring smiles and also solidarity to those affected by cancer is something that's so important to me, because it's such a lonely journey. Like sometimes you just feel like, yeah, you have your friends, you have your family there, but like to be honest, like no one's gonna really understand what you're going through personally. And so I just wanted to make sure that like through this kit I'm able to provide essentials that people actually need, but also to let them know like there is hope. Like I'm here, like hey, I run through all this crap and like I just want to let you know like I'm here rooting for you and you can do this.
I love that. And we'll make sure to add a link for both the YouTube and for your story page, and see, anywhere else we can plug it, because one, that's incredible. And I love that you found this sort of drive and purpose. I think you're right. It is very similar to like the way that the patient story to me is a message of you are not alone. Sounds to me like that care package is you are not alone. And no matter who you are, I don't care what walk of life, once you enter this realm of really just being in a medical situation where it's traumatic and it's super isolating, it's a message that people can't hear enough. And so I'm so grateful that people are tackling it in different ways. And with that, I mean, I am so grateful, like you spend so much time with us. I can't wait to get your story out there. And I hope we can keep, talking and checking in with you and seeing how Kits to Heart's doing, and yeah, and keep this relationship going.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you just having this platform for patients like us and survivors like us to share our stories, because I think it's just so, so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia.